Hi, welcome to the Opinion Talk Show, where your opinions count. My name is Adeline Ortiz, and joining me today is my co-host, Mirna Santiago, and returning guest, Marco Caviglia. Today we're discussing domestic violence issues, and specifically whether or not municipalities should be held liable when the law enforcement fails to enforce an order of protection in place and a victim is killed or seriously injured by someone who violates that order of protection. So, Mirna, if you could share with us your thoughts on this subject.
My feeling is that no, the police and the municipality should not be held liable when someone gets killed, even if there is an order of protection in place. And the reason for that is that we cannot turn the police, we cannot turn the municipality into personal bodyguards for people. I know this is a heartfelt issue, and it's obviously Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And it pains me when I read something, and I always send them to you, of some woman who got murdered. You know, she got stalked and murdered by her abuser, and there's an order of protection, there's a restraining order, and you know, somehow the police didn't get there in time. And as unfortunate as that is, we simply can't. We can't turn the police into personal bodyguards for people.
Well, I don't know that the police are personal bodyguards for people. I mean, they certainly have an obligation to enforce the orders of protection, to be aware who has them, and to respond to this person's needs, and the member of a community. I mean, this is what they do. They enforce the law, and an order of protection is a court order. So, well,
absolutely, and I agree with that they have to enforce the law. But at the same time, with these women who are being stalked, the only way to enforce it, to make sure that the abuser does not get close to them, is to have someone with them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is impossible for the municipality. Again, the police do absolutely have a duty to the public, but they have a duty to the public, not just to one segment of the population. And that would be what would happen if they were walking around following these domestic violence victims. You know, Marco?
Well, one of the things that should be understood is that the United States Supreme Court has already ruled that there's no federal action that you can bring successfully in a federal court for failure to enforce or protect someone under an order of protection. Last year, the Court of Appeals of New York ruled that even if you have an order of protection and the woman calls and says, "I've just received a death threat from the person that you're protected against," and he in fact harms you, unless the plaintiff, meaning the woman, can show that there was a special relationship between the police department and her, you can't successfully sue, and they decline to uphold any liability. And what they said is that there's just, in that case, a general duty to the public. And if it's no more than a general duty to the public, you will not successfully do that. So what that reinforces is the fact that in the final analysis, a victim has to be on guard and do everything she can to protect herself. And you got to remember that police departments are largely reactive, not preventative. And I think Mirna has a very good point in that you really can't expect the police to do everything. If resources were endless, maybe you could, but unless you've got a police officer stationed at someone's place, or they've said, "We'll do this, we'll watch out for you specifically," there's no special relationship, so you'll be out of court.
Well, unfortunately, these statistics really are staggering when it comes to incidents of domestic violence. Every 9 seconds in the United States, a woman is assaulted or beaten. And certainly I can understand what an overwhelming responsibility that can be for law enforcement to try and keep track of all of these. But certainly there are certain municipalities or towns or areas where there's more of it than others. And maybe law enforcement just needs to be more strategic, or they need to be very special domestic violence units that do nothing but respond to these types of things, that keep track of orders of protection, that do sort of monitor that victim to make sure that victim is going to be safe and protected. And I don't mean follow her or him around all day long, but there has to be some component in every police department, I think, and in every municipality, where there's a system for keeping track of these orders of protection and making sure that law enforcement is at least patrolling the area and taking some proactive measures to safeguard this person's well-being.
Actually, Adeline, and sorry to interrupt you, but I was really surprised to find out the NYPD does have that. The
Yes.
NYPD has a dedicated unit to domestic violence, where if a call comes in and it's between romantic partners, or if it's members of the same family, the NYPD has to report that. And they are, you know, and when there's an order of protection, they actually have to do drop-ins.
Yes.
To certain homes and make sure that the person that the order of protection is against is not at that home. But again, it's at, you know, you really have to think about that as well. If they have to drop in and make sure that person is not at that home, it's the victim who has let him in. So, you know, a lot of times you get a lot of these reports, and again, domestic violence is unfortunate, it's very sad, but a lot of times people have a blowout, they have an argument, they want the person out of the home, and they're reporting it as domestic violence when it's a simple argument. So now you have an issue where there's a restraining order, there's an order of protection against somebody that maybe they should not have gotten, and there's other issues involved in enforcing those as well. I know, Marco, you've had cases that dealt with that.
Well, I can think of a number of cases when I was a prosecutor that were horrendous cases, and we prosecuted them to the fullest, as naturally we should have. But on the other hand, some of these cases have basically game or play the system. And I'm going to give you a real-life example. Not long ago, I had a case in family court in which the respondent husband had been issued an order of protection, was forced out of his home for 6 weeks before it was resolved. And what he did was he was having a verbal disagreement, not even an argument, with his wife, who they weren't getting along, and he flicked a spitball at her 15 feet away, which missed her, of course, but hit her desk. And she filed a harassment petition in family court, and a judge actually, ex parte, meaning he's not even there or knows about it, issues the order of protection, throws him out of court. Now, that's a ridiculous situation, even though it got into court. But my point there is that these types of cases are not as rare as one would think anymore, and that there are a lot of people that game the system, and this trivializes domestic violence. It spreads out resources, it clogs up the court, and so forth, and a lot of them are just setting themselves up for divorce action, so they'll be in a superior position against the other spouse, usually the husband, in claiming domestic violence. So we have to be very careful of that when we talk about orders of protection are enforced. The more of these orders of protection out there, the more the police have to try to figure out, well, what's really serious and not. And they're not given any discretion. If you call and say that, please come over here, so-and-so is bothering me, they come, if there is an order of protection, they're required to arrest that person. No investigation. It doesn't matter if they think that this is hokey. They will have to arrest them, or otherwise they face disciplinary charges.
Well, unfortunately, Marco, I think that your examples are really examples of exceptions. I mean, certainly you have couples who are bickering, who are looking to get at each other, who you know, maybe do not have a legitimate grievance, but that is not the overwhelming majority of what domestic violence and domestic violence incidents and abusive relationships are. There are many studies that show that at least 10 million children annually witness domestic violence in their home. And it's very sad. And other very legitimate studies that show even in teen relationships, 1 out of every 5 teenage girls reports that when faced with a breakup with her boyfriend, that he has either threatened violence against her or threatened to harm himself, which is a form of emotional and psychological abuse on that teenage girl. So there are certainly going to be exceptions, as in everything, but the reality is that domestic violence is a very serious issue in this country, and that it does raise very legitimate and serious health concerns, employment concerns, and so on. And it all really starts and rests with law enforcement.
But what else can law enforcement do at that point? And, you know, I don't doubt your statistics, and I'm sure it happens. You know, like I said, domestic violence, I mean, there's really no excuse for it. There's really no way to justify it. But at the same time, putting that burden on the municipality to now try to protect these people. As it exists, the municipality, the police officers have absolute immunity. So unless, you know, there's a pattern in practice and it's malicious and it's deliberate that they're not getting there in time, you know, like they're on the dispatch saying, well, you know what, these people fighting again, I'm not going to go for half an hour, let them figure it out, or something that's obvious to the court that the police department did wrong, they're not going to find liability on the police department. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with them having absolute immunity in that case, because, I mean, let's talk about the slippery slope, for instance. Imagine if somebody breaks into your neighbor's house. You can then go after the police department if your house gets broken into 3 months down the line and say, well, you know what, you were on notice because my neighbor's house was broken into. We can't do that. We can't impose it on the municipality. In New York City alone, 40,000 orders of protection were issued last year alone. There's only 30,000 police officers in New York. So imagine if you had to take a huge number of those police officers to now go to these people's homes to follow these victims. You know, it's unfortunate, but it cannot be done. We don't have the resources to do it.
And I can certainly appreciate that point. Again, given the overwhelming statistics of domestic violence in this country, you cannot expect police, law enforcement to respond to absolutely every incident in a timely manner and save someone's life. However, law enforcement can go a step further when it comes to providing information, very valuable resources to victims of domestic abuse when they respond to these calls. And I think very often they don't do that. For example, the Office of Victim Services, which is housed in Albany and has offices in both ends of New York State, has various victim services agencies in every municipality and every county in the state of New York that can help a victim to complete claim forms to, for example, get their locks changed, pay for shelter, pay for loss of income or wages associated with the abuse or the violence that they experience, relocation, what have you. I mean, there's a lot of funding that goes into these victim service programs that is absolutely available, and there are phenomenal resources literally in every municipality and county in the state of New York. And law enforcement isn't sharing this information when they go to reach out to these victims of domestic violence. If they did, they'd have the support that they need.
Well, many of them probably don't even know. It's not the police's job to educate the public. Their job is to protect and to serve. So if you're being abused, their job is to go there and arrest the abuser. They're not going to sit there and spend half an hour telling you, well, you can go to the victim services in Albany, you can do this, no, because they have to go and arrest the drug dealer. They have to go and arrest the murderer. They have to go, I mean, that is their job. So I think we're asking too much of the police department to try to tell them, okay, now you have to be teacher, you have to be babysitter, you have to be bodyguard, you have to be this. They already have enough to do.
Oh, well, I disagree. I think that it could be as simple as some police departments do. They actually have this information pre-printed on business card style cards, and they actually just hand it to the victim when they make these calls. There's no reason that every police department in the state couldn't do something very similar to that and make sure that before they leave that house that victim of abuse has some information where they can go for services and resources and don't have to rely on calling 911 every single time an incident comes up. Marco.
Well, I know the police are required when they have one of these calls of making the victim aware that they have the right to file charges in both family court and with the police department. And I think they also give them generally other information of which they might be aware. I don't know how much information they may be aware of, as Mirna points out. But I do know that a lot of organizations will immediately jump in. By way of example, there's some innovative programs in Dutchess County. The Dutchess County SPCA has initiated a program where they've realized that lots of times an abuser will not threaten the person but threaten to kill their pet. And people, including women, obviously have very strong feelings about their pets, and lots of women won't leave the household because he will kill the pet dog or cat. And they would not be able to go to a homeless shelter or a women's battered shelter with their pets. So what the SPCA has done is said for these battered women, they will take in the pet for at least 30 days while the woman is in the shelter in order to make arrangements for the pet to be placed. So there are a lot of programs, and a lot of people don't know about these programs. But getting back to the original point, I don't know that you can expect the police to be proactive. Even in the instances you gave, we're talking about being reactive. I'm called in after the fact and I'm going to give you information. What about being called again? You know, you get called again. Did you follow the instructions? Did you do this and that? And lots of women, for whatever reasons, legitimate or illegitimate reasons, don't follow the advice sometimes, because it's a lot harder to say, well, why don't you just leave him or do this? There's a lot of issues, and that's complex. So I don't think it's as simple to say, well, here's some information and we can follow it up. But holding a municipality liable, I think the courts have spoken on that one.
Well, I think that educating law enforcement is an absolute with respect to the number of times that they may have to respond to a specific household before that woman actually leaves. They need to understand the dynamics of an abusive relationship, and that even in a perfectly normal and healthy relationship, it would take a couple, maybe several separations before they actually finally terminate the relationship and never go back to it. So you can imagine the dynamic of abuse and psychological and emotional control that an abuser has over the victim, even by threatening, for example, the pet or children, or to show up at their place of employment, that it makes it even that much more difficult for that victim to leave that household. Very often, the abuser has already isolated the victim to such a degree that she has absolutely no one to turn to, no place to turn to, no friends, no family, no place to go. And in addition to that, there's a scarcity of shelters available for women and their children and their pets, as you say. And so this is an important issue. Law enforcement must understand that they may visit that very same household 6, 7, 10 times, okay, before that woman actually leaves. But to leave that information of the resources that are available to her is critical each time, even if they had to do it every one of those 10 times. I think that it's incumbent on law enforcement to be more proactive when it comes to domestic violence cases.
But let me ask you this: you've just said yourself that the police officer may go to that house 6, 7, 8, 9 times before that woman actually decides to leave. So how are we going to impose liability on the police officer? Is he, when is that man going to kill her? Is it going to be the 6th time, the 7th time, the 5th time, the 4th? So now we're putting the police officers now in the position of having to guess when this person is going to do this heinous crime, and let me jump in now. Again, it's almost impossible. As Marco said, the courts have already spoken about it anyway, so it's a moot point. But the point of the matter is that even if it was a case that's coming up now, and the courts had to decide it, I would argue that it's impossible to impose that sort of liability on the municipality.
I wouldn't say impossible. I'd have to disagree with impossible. And I think certainly under certain circumstances where law enforcement has completely taken a hands-off approach, because they said, I'm not going, I'm just not going. I'd rather have my coffee and donut than to respond to this household for the 6th time, okay, because I know that they're just having their disagreement, and it's all just, they're going to kiss and make up and it's all going to be over. And if that happens to be the day that woman is killed or those children are killed, then yes, absolutely. Now, if you're responding to some other emergency and there's a legitimate reason why you weren't able to get to that household, so be it. Yes, absolutely. That's understandable. But very often, law enforcement officers, like anyone else, can become biased and can allow their personal emotions to interfere with their job functions. Okay, and just say, I'm not going there. They always kiss and make up anyway, and we're wasting our time going over there and whatever. I'm just not going to deal with that. There's no room for that discretion, is what I'm saying.
And there isn't. I think in those cases, and Marco, you can answer, when I'm sort of done with my point here. I think there have been certain cases in New York where the courts have said there is no discretion. You can't decide unilaterally, municipality, you're not going to respond to domestic violence cases. In those cases, the courts have said there's a bias, and it's against domestic violence or it's against women or whatever, and it has imposed liability. But that was going above and beyond. It's not the initial point that we had, which is, okay, there's a restraining order that's been issued, and now this woman expects protection from the police, and if she gets a hangnail, it's we have to impose liability. It's not. That's a different scenario.
Well, again, I mean, and I will probably beat this issue into the ground, but I think that law enforcement has an obligation to be more proactive. For example, when it comes to immigrants or illegal aliens in the country who are also victims of domestic abuse. Okay, the feeling is that they don't belong here anyway, and they should just go back to their own countries, and so who cares what happens to them? When in reality, even people who are here unlawfully are entitled to those law enforcement services, to those protections, and in fact, even information of the fact that they have options available to them, like a U visa or a T visa, which actually allows an illegal immigrant to gain temporary residency status and authorization to work while they're in this country up to 3 years.
Is that based on domestic abuse?
On the fact that they were abused,
Okay.
on the fact that they are victims of domestic violence, that essentially qualifies them to apply for this temporary status so that they can be here and they can obtain shelter and they can obtain services and they can work.
Well, that's good
And
to
they
know.
can, absolutely.
That's
they can
important
work.
information.
A lot of people don't know that.
Well, well, first of all, I think there might be a reluctance of police officers or even prosecutors to approach illegal immigrant victims with the same force and vigor, because lots of them will be concerned about deportation and will disappear. In fact, for them to call in the first place has to be really serious for them. Second, I like to defend the police a little bit. I don't think I don't think that it's fair to say, and I presume you're exaggerating, that, well, they don't want to miss their coffee and donuts and go on a call. I think when a unit is out of service for whatever reason, that means they're not available for emergencies such as robberies, burglaries, homicides, car accidents where they're needed, and so forth. Police departments are very limited resources. Each one of these first responders is very expensive. And to add just one policeman costs a small fortune, not only in immediate but also retirement costs and pensions. So the taxpayers are very aware of that. And like anything else with limited resources in life, we have to balance it. And I think, saying that the police should do this and this, et cetera, it's like saying, oh, there ought to be a law, and that's why we have so many laws. Everybody takes that literally. They just keep passing more laws.
Exactly.
So I think that, it's not as, we can advocate all these things, and I agree with a lot of them in concept, but I think it's unfair and also dangerous. And one other thing, I was unaware of this extension program for illegal immigrants, but believe it or not, I am almost positive when word gets out about that a lot of illegal immigrants will say, I can stay here 3 more years with the cloak of protection and the blessing of the government if I say I was a domestic violence victim.
Well,
so,
no, it's not quite that easy. They actually have to be proactive and assist in the apprehension and prosecution of their abusers, and that's always a very frightening thing for them. But this is all the time that we have for this topic, unfortunately, right now. For more information on domestic violence and the resources available in the state of New York, you should visit the New York State website of Office of Victim Services, www.ovs.ny.gov. And I'll let Mirna take us into our lightning round now, which is very exciting.